Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 500 likes on this one. I think if everybody took just a quick second, we could do it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I didn't scream when Deb brought out the platter. The dish was large, white, and decorated with little porcelain angels, the good china for special occasions. I had thought there was something grotesque about those little porcelain angels before Deb set her masterpiece upon it. It was the conflict avoidance in me that stopped the scream, but it didn't stop my jaw from dropping. "Mom, you said you weren't going to do this time," Derrick said through his hands. "Well, no, I told you on the phone. We had a surprise visitor yesterday," said Deb. "Bet you never saw a Thanksgiving turkey like that in Minneapolis." Trent grunted at me before smugly, theatrically stabbing into a roast arm with his fork. He seemed pleased that I didn't have a response. My mouth just wouldn't form words. I couldn't move or speak. I didn't. Derrick finally took his fingers off of his nose. "You said last month that you were going to do a turkey this year." Trent stuffed an enormous forkful of stringy gray meat into his mouth and chewed, staring at me all the while without blinking. "No, sweetie, you're remembering wrong." Deb, who would not look at me at all, argued in her gentle sing-song voice. She was short and thin with a fading blonde bob and gray roots. She wore a beige sweater over a beige dress. "I said your dad wasn't up for it, with his hip. And with my sciatica and your brothers gone, I just didn't think we could manage it this year. But then yesterday around 4, just about when I was unwrapping the frozen turkey, the doorbell rang." "Trent, please." Deb slapped Trent's hand as it reached for another big forkful of meat. "Wait till I carve some for everyone first. For Christ's sake, poor Lexi is sitting there thinking, oh, these redneck McCabe's. Bunch of barbarians raised in a barn." "It's fine," I said automatically. This was the first movement of my muscles since Deb brought out the platter. "I don't think that." "You don't have to be so nice," Deb replied. "I can take it." Derrick was staring at me now, too. His hand passed under the table to squeeze mine. "Why couldn't you just carve it in the kitchen?" Trent huffed. "That's not how Thanksgiving dinner works, dear," Deb replied. Her thin fingers worked to saw thinner slices of cooked flesh off the bones. The meat seemed to be somewhat tough, because she was going very slow at it. Anyway, I asked this fellow where he was coming from, and he said Rinley. "Lexi, that's a whole county over. He's a door-to-door JW. I forgot to say, he's got this stack of flyers. You should see them, they're funny. Anyway, I say, don't you JWs always travel in pairs?" And he says, "No, ma'am, that's not a requirement. That's only for safety." And I say, "Well, aren't you worried about crazy hicks out here in the boonies taking shots at you?" And he says, "I never had a problem out here before." And I say, "Deb," Trent blurted. He let out a long, excruciated grunt as he stood up laboriously, taking great care to make sure that we all knew how much it hurt him. He pushed his walker around the table and grabbed the carving knife from his wife. "I'll show you how to carve a roast. Christ almighty, I swear to God." He sawed the meat with violent speed, splashing grease on his old navy checkered flannel. And I say, "Mom, maybe save it for another time," Derrick said. He made a big show of secretly nodding towards me so his mother knew why. "It's a funny story." Deb frowned. "I want to hear it," I said. Deb only sighed and sucked her teeth. Then she sat down. Well, it's not that funny. It's dumb, actually. I still want to hear it, I said. My phone buzzed in my dress pocket, and I pulled it out instinctively. I'm so sorry this is awful. The message read. It was from Derrick. He squeezed my hand again. I took mine away. She's calling the cops, Trent said. Told ya. I'm not, I said. I just got a text. Surprised you can get texts out here, Deb said. Most people can't. Too far out in the sticks. I can get them through Wi-Fi, I said. I'd gotten the password off of their fridge when I arrived. It was under a magnet that said, Never mess with a Pisces woman who was born in March and is allergic to stupidity. They'll never find your body. I also think I still have bars, though, too. I was getting sick of Deb acting like this suburban McMansion was so far from civilization, it might as well be the middle of Alaska. We were 35 minutes from Grand Rapids, tops. Gals try to call the cops sometimes, Trent continued, breathing heavy now as he struggled with the roast. He wasn't doing much better than his wife at it. Sweat dripped from his wispy brown crew cut into his piggy eyes, but he refused to slow or stop. They don't last very long. By the time the cops get to our door, we've already got a whole new Thanksgiving meal to serve up to them. Okay, I said. He raised his eyebrows, as if to accentuate that there was an implication there that I should pick up on. Dad, Derrick said. She's not calling the cops. The thing I didn't like about Derrick's dad most was that he said everything like he'd rehearsed it in his head a lot beforehand. Sometimes Derrick could just sound like that. He'd say something and raise his eyebrows with a smile like he was expecting a big reaction. He wouldn't move past it until I gave some acknowledgement that yes, I did get the implication. I never realized how much that annoyed me until now. What do you want? A round of applause? God, Trent threw down the knife. Roast is tough, Deb. What about low and slow, don't you understand? Well, there was a lot of meat, dear. If you just fixed the grill this summer. Oh, don't go bringing that up. Men, Deb tutted. Nothing is ever their fault. You know what I'm talking about, Lexi. Us women take the blame for all their stupid mistakes, but that's life. Cleaning up our men's messes without complaint. Deb smiled conspiratorial at me, and I smiled back, even though I didn't relate to or agree with the sentiment. The front door was just down the hall behind Deb, just a few square meters of gray carpet and beige walls, smattered with tacky and vaguely threatening Hobby Lobby signage. Grandma's crap list. Don't say crap. Don't do crap. Don't expect crap. The house rules. Act right or get a trip to the woodshed. I kept glancing at it, measuring the distance in my mind, wondering if I could run fast enough to get to my car before one of Derrick's parents caught up to me, or drew a weapon. Another buzz in my pocket. I love you, Derrick had texted me. I could see him out of the corner of my eye trying to make eye contact with me and shoot me his own conspiratorial smile, but I did not look at him. Trent slapped a pile of rubbery gray meat on a plate and passed it to me. Breast or thigh? He joked without smiling. I took the plate. The meat was wet, as if it had been boiled, and the thin ring of white fat and skin around the edge jiggled as it separated from the muscle. I thought I could still see blonde arm hair on the skin. Derrick took his plate of gray meat from his dad, as Deb took hers. Derrick leaned over to me and whispered in my ear, "Don't forget to say thank you." "Thanks, Deb," I said. "And my dad?" Deb passed a basket of white grocery store rolls around. There was a low white ramekin of canned cranberry sauce on the table, and a big blue bowl of salad with Russian dressing. There was an extremely mushy and condensed soup, forward green bean casserole. In an effort to make a good impression, I had brought candied sweet potatoes. I took a generous helping of the salad, which was somehow also very wet. The Russian dressing water from the lettuce pooled with the unthinkable and loathsome juices of the gray flesh at the bottom of the plate. I also took a generous helping of the sweet potatoes. No one else did, though. "Let's wait until we say grace," Deb said through her smiling teeth, watching me take a deep swig of my wine. "Thirsty, aren't we?" she chirped. She poured me some more wine, filling it almost to the brim this time. I think she meant this as an insult, but I was going to do that myself anyway, so the joke was on her. "Would you like to lead the prayer, Lexi?" I don't really know what to say," I said. "Just say what's in your heart." I cleared my throat. I looked to Derrick. He nodded encouragingly at me, a sign he wasn't going to step in and rescue me. "Thank you, God, for bringing us all together here." Deb and Trent both bowed their heads and touched their palms. Derrick followed suit. "I'm so glad I got to meet Derrick's lovely parents. Thank you for this amazing meal." I felt the wine come back up into my mouth a little bit and had to gag it back down. "We're all grateful to be here, rather than anywhere else. Amen." Derrick wasn't religious as far as I knew, but he gave a reverent nod before he opened his eyes and picked up his knife and fork. "That was a beautiful prayer," Deb said. She sniffled. "You picked a good one, sweetie. Don't let her go." "No, thank you for carving your dinner. I see how it is," Trent mumbled. I watched Derrick take a small mouthful of meat. It was sinewy and had come from the hand. He chewed and chewed. I'd never been less attracted to him. My family ate Thanksgiving dinner in the early afternoon. Sometimes my grandparents were there, sometimes my dad's brother and his kids. Sometimes family friends would come. My candied sweet potatoes always killed. Not a spoonful left by the end. But the thing was that we all liked each other. My mom would get a little tipsy and tell crazy college party stories. My dad would burn the pecan pie and laugh so hard he cried. And then we'd laugh so hard we cried. And then we'd watch movies and laugh some more. "So what is it you do for a living?" Deb asked, chewing on her roast. Her teeth scraped the fork as she pulled it off. "I'm a personal assistant at a pet magazine." "Oh, that's adorable." Deb laughed. I smiled a little bit. "It's harder than it sounds. You know The Devil Wears Prada?" I asked. "No," Deb said. "You like Prada?" Trent asked through an open mouth of food. "No, but basically, I do what Anne Hathaway does, except for with dog clothes. But if you haven't seen it, never mind." "We don't like the devil in this house," Trent said. "It's not a literal devil, it's Meryl Streep." "Let's not keep talking about this. It's Thanksgiving." Deb snapped. Buzz. "My mom loves you. You're doing great." "You know," I said, swallowing a bite of sweet potatoes, which I made very sure hadn't touched the gray meat or any of its accumulated juices. "These candied sweet potatoes are made with real maple syrup and brown butter. I toasted the pecans myself and sugared them with homemade maple caramel." After a long silence, Trent wiped his mouth and replied, "I don't like real maple." "It's too strong," Derrick agreed. "We already have a dessert," Deb said. "Regular mashed potatoes are better," Trent said, "and they're traditional." "Teach their own," I said politely. I poured myself another glass of wine. Honestly, I hoped they did kill me. Anything to end this dinner sooner. There was a loud, faraway noise from below us. A pounding, a rattling, and then a long, low wail. Derrick put his head back in his hands. Mom, that'll be our JW. He's alive. You know how hard it is to break down a whole carcass, son? Trent spat. Nobody's got the time for that. Not when you find out you gotta make a Thanksgiving dinner for 2 extra people last minute the day before. Now get your elbows off the table. Then in a moment of brilliance, he added, only one set of elbows on this table tonight, and they're well done. He grinned and looked at me for a reaction again. What, you got nothing to say? I don't know what you want me to say, I said. So what's on your mind? Trent responded. Okay, well, candied sweet potatoes aren't a dessert, I said. They're a side, but I don't want to start an argument. You've wanted to start an argument since you got here, Trent said. Don't think we can't see you think you're better than us. College-educated girl, women's studies. You probably got all kinds of opinions. I think you want to start an argument, I said. Derrick groaned beside me. See? Knew you think you're smart. The man in the basement let out another agonized wail. It was journalism, not women's studies, I said. Like it matters. This day and age, you tell me what the difference is. It's all women's studies, gender studies these days. Trent huffed. He chewed as he talked, and I could hear the fat squeak between his teeth, and the prisoner downstairs built up the energy for another scream. When I was a girl, I took a women's studies course in college. Deb piped up, attempting to smooth down the hostile tone of the conversation by pretending she couldn't sense it. Back then, there were still ladies who would go out and burn their bras in a big fire. I understood feminism when it was about equal rights, but I look around today and, well, hasn't it gotten out of hand? You know how it is, Lexi. You're a pretty girl. You don't shave your head or pierce your eyebrows or anything like that, do you? The Jehovah's Witness wailed in the basement and rattled his chains. Would you shut him up? Trent snapped at Derrick. Me? Derrick said. Dad. He gestured at me. Like that would sway anyone here. Trent's big lumpy face was stony as a gargoyle's as he gestured at his walker. He wouldn't be able to go downstairs with his bad hip. I'll do it, Deb said. It's my mess. I'll clean it up. She stood up and pushed in her squeaky beige chair. No, Mom, Derrick said. I'll do it. He looked at me, then looked away quickly, towards the gray carpet. Derrick grabbed the carving knife from the roast and wiped it on his napkin. Then he headed towards the pantry door. That's my boy, Trent shouted without any real pride. Sure hope you're loyal to him, Lexi, Trent said to me once he was arguably out of earshot. Most women these days. I'll go with him, I said as I stood, almost knocking a fork off the table. I hurried after my boyfriend through the dingy, gray-tiled kitchen, past a hanging wood sign which read, "In this house we believe. No crying, no whining, no back-talking," and catching him before the secret door behind the rack of very expired dry goods swung shut. Lexi, Derrick said, 4 steps down the creaky wooden staircase. The man's screams were louder and more frantic now. I'm so sorry about all this. Is this not normal for your family? No, I mean, the ritual cannibalism is just a Thanksgiving thing. I promise. And my mom said she wasn't going to do it this year. I thought it would be fine. Derrick smiled. I don't like the way that smile looked on his face. Honestly, I didn't like his face very much anymore. I could see his dad's meaty forehead and his mom's thin nose. I could see Deb's wide cheekbones and Trent's lipless mouth. You don't have to do what they say, I said. It's not that big of a deal, Derrick replied. It's just family stuff, you know? I didn't. Derrick, I said, I don't like your family. Derrick looked hurt. I know this is a lot, he said, and my dad is being mean, but you don't choose your family. I mean, why not? I said, following him as he carried the knife down the stairs. What's the alternative? Derrick said. I turned my back on my mom and dad. No, never. I believe in loyalty, Lexi. Even when people aren't perfect. Even when I don't agree with them. I don't agree with you all the time, but we're still together. Well, don't expect me to come to any future McCabe Thanksgivings, I said. I understand why you'd feel that way after today, but you might change your mind when they're your family too. Derrick stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked up at me with his big, dopey eyes. Derrick. Lexi, this isn't how I wanted to do this, but you've seen the worst of my family's secrets, and you're still by my side, so will you stay by my side? Derrick was doing that thing again, that Trent thing, where he set a line and waited for my reaction. Let's just get out of here, I said. Will you stay by my side? He repeated like maybe he thought I hadn't heard. For the rest of our lives? I just want to go. I'm asking you to marry me. I have ears, Derrick, I snapped. It was the first time I'd ever snapped at him. I never snapped at anyone, especially not him. His expression didn't move an inch. He was smiling for some reason, like this was the happiest day of his life. Then say yes, he said. No, I don't want to marry you, I said. Because this is where I came from? He swallowed, shaking. No, because this is who you're choosing to be, I replied. Derrick hung his head. The knife dropped to his knee. Things aren't that black and white, Lexi. I clapped my hands over my ears as another shriek boomed through the basement. Close now. Derrick sighed. He hurried into the basement proper, and I followed him. Again, I didn't scream. What was left of the man was chained by the ankles to the wall. He crawled like a caterpillar. The stumps where his arms used to start on his torso haphazardly bandaged with paper towels and medical tape. His face was a pulp, his body bruised. He was naked. An overturned bucket leaked into the drain in the floor. He looked up at Derrick and I with wide, white eyes. Help me, he screamed. Get me out of here. Oh Lord, please get me out of here. Sorry, man, Derrick said, stooping over the prisoner. His knee fell onto the man's back, pinning him in place. He raised the knife. Thanksgiving with the family. You know how it is. Derrick, I said. He looked at me a second too late to see the bread knife flash under his chin. By the time he did, it was lodged all the way through his neck. His face was stunned, betrayed. I felt bad. I pulled the knife out, followed by a torrent of blood. Down it went, towards the floor drain. Derrick dropped down to both knees. He clutched his neck. He didn't scream. Don't make a sound, I said to the armless, naked prisoner, who had been screaming a lot until then. He'd rolled away to the side as soon as Derrick's weight was off of him. If you stay quiet, we'll be out of here in time to finish Thanksgiving with our own families. The man spat bloody drool. Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate Thanksgiving, he managed. Yeah, I said. I think you're on to something with that. Derrick twitched and gurgled. Then finally he stopped. I imagined my own family at home, topping off the evening with hot toddies and bad cable TV Christmas movies. Lexi, Derrick, Deb called from upstairs. We're cutting into the pie. Hurry up or your dad'll eat it before you get any. As soon as I find my knife. I'll help you, I shouted up the stairs. My phone buzzed. Miss you this year, Lexi. Happy Turkey Day. Love, Mom. I wiped blood from my thumb and texted her back. Love you too. I started up the stairs. This morning I woke up with cold sweats and I was out of breath. It was 3:45 a.m. I had a nightmare. All I remember is a man staring at me through my window. It was too dark to make out a face, but he was visibly drenched with water. His skin looked pale and bluish. He opened his mouth really wide, and that's when I woke up. I definitely can't go back to sleep after that. I have a good habit of writing down every dream/nightmare I have as soon as I wake up. I feel they sometimes have some sort of meaning. I heard my dad getting ready for work, and my mom was up making his breakfast. I overheard my dad talking to my mom. He said something about how everything is going to be okay, and the hallucinations will go away with time. That kind of made me feel uneasy. Is my mom going through something I don't know about? Of course they won't tell their teenage daughter anything of that sort. I'm just going to leave it alone for now. I'm still in shock about what I just dreamt about. I need to shower my cold sweats away and start my day early, since I know I won't fall back asleep and school starts in a couple hours anyway. Later that day. Me and my brother just got home from school. "Mom," I yelled as we walked in the house, but she didn't answer. Her car is still in the driveway, so I know she's home. My brother said she's probably up in her room. I went up to check on her, since I like telling her about my day. I got to her room door and it was locked. "Hey Mom, are you in there?" I put my ear to the door and heard some mumbling but couldn't make out any words. "Mom, are you okay in there?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I'll be right out," she said in an uneasy tone. I walked towards my room, but as I passed the bathroom, I noticed that the floor was flooded. The bath looked like it overflowed. "What the?" I whispered. I go back towards my mom's room and she frantically opens the door and shuts it quick right behind her as if she didn't want me looking in. "Mom, the bathroom is flooded. What happened?" "Don't worry, I'm about to clean it. I accidentally fell asleep while taking a bath and had the water running." I go with her and help her clean it up. "Mom, are you okay? I overheard Dad this morning say something about you seeing things." "I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. I'm just not sleeping enough." "Oh, yeah, I understand. I couldn't fall back asleep this morning. I had such a weird nightmare." "What was it about?" "I don't remember much. It was a man at my window. His clothes were soaked. He honestly looked dead, like if he drowned or something." She looked mortified. She asked if I can finish cleaning up and she ran to her room and slammed the door shut. I was so confused, but I finished cleaning and I went downstairs. I asked my brother, who was eating in the dining room, "Do you think Mom is acting a bit strange?" "No, I haven't noticed," he said. Of course he hasn't. I go on and tell him about the dream I had, and he looked at me shocked, as if he knew what I was referring to. He said, "I also had a strange dream about a man. He was standing at the foot of my bed and he was also soaked, but his back was facing me. There is no way he had a similar dream as me." I was shocked. I couldn't believe it, to be honest. How could he have had basically the same dream as me? He said, "The dream felt so vivid." Mine did too. This has gotten really weird now and I'm overthinking it. This definitely has to have some sort of meaning behind it. My mom came downstairs looking completely out of it. She looks tired, stressed, and honestly scared. She said she's running an errand to the hardware store and told us, "Stay out of my room," in an aggressive tone. Me and my brother looked at each other and I told her to drive safe. We saw her driving off and I told my brother, "We have to see what's in her room." My brother agreed and we went to her door, and it was of course locked. We didn't know how to pick a lock and we obviously didn't want to break the door open. I suggested we get the ladder from the garage and go through her window and hope it's unlocked. We went to the garage and we were so confused that our dad's car was parked inside. He was supposed to be at work. "What is Dad's car doing here?" I said. We didn't have too much time to think about it, so we grabbed the ladder and went to their bedroom window in the backyard. I climbed up first, and luckily the window was unlocked. I jumped in and my brother came in right after. We looked around and their room looked pretty normal until my brother realized there was a puddle of water coming from under the closet door. We both looked at each other and we slowly walked over to the closet. I opened the door and there he was, laying on the floor. Our father, soaked, pale blue skin, mouth wide open, dead. I've worked at a Thai restaurant for a few years as a dishwasher. That was my job on paper, but over time I started to pick up more duties between the time of people quitting and getting hired. I got to the point where I could cook anything off the menu if needed. During a hectic shift one night, I helped pack some takeout orders and handed them over to the waiting DoorDash drivers. My boss spoke in broken English, but is one of the funniest guys I've ever known. It was hard to get stressed on busy nights like that with him forgetting words, making his jokes 10 times funnier. Takeout orders flew out of the door, and we tried to keep up with the rush inside the restaurant. A snag hit when we ran out of cooked pork belly. One last order of a pork belly bowl needed to be sent out right away, or else we would lose our driver to a different order and risk a bad rating. I told my boss we should send a message out or outright cancel the order. Instead, he placed the last strip of pork belly in the takeout order and sent it off. The bowl should have had at least 5 pieces, not 1. We honestly didn't have time to send a message and deal with a single order with 10 waiting in the kitchen. I hated the idea of sending out meal lacking the main ingredient, but got so busy the rest of the night, I totally forgot about it. We received no complaints or negative reviews that night, so we put it out of our minds. The next night was just as busy. At least my boss cooked extra pork belly in the morning so we wouldn't run out in the middle of the rush again. At the end of the night, I volunteered to clean up and lock up the restaurant. He trusted me enough to do so. I liked doing the end of shift cleanup. My apartment was within walking distance, unlike everyone else who needed the last bus home. I put on some music and got to work putting the kitchen back in order after our long 2 nights of running around. I just finished up and shut off most of the lights ready to leave. The kitchen dark with only the exit light showing the way out. I double-checked my keys were in my bag hanging off my shoulder and was about to take a step toward the door when I heard something. I felt positive someone just took a few steps inside the kitchen. That was odd. I knew for a fact everyone left. Did the owner come back in and check the stock, and I just didn't hear him over my music? "Hello, boss," I called out in the dark room, my voice shaking slightly. I strained to hear, thinking I'd just imagined things. Just when I went to move again, I heard something behind me. A sound of fabric moving. 2 massive hands came out of nowhere to wrap long bony fingers around my arms from behind. I jumped and let out a small squeak of fear, unable to move from shock. I wanted to run and yet my body refused to listen. Those hands looking human, but the black skin and the pointed fingers simply couldn't be anything beside a creature from nightmares. I'd wished this was a robbery instead of whatever stood at my back. The sound of fabric came again. A hot puff of breath moved my hair near my ears and the back of my neck crawled. What the hell was this thing going to do? I really didn't want to get tore apart because I stayed late at work. It could do anything to me and no one would find out until the morning. Hell, if it didn't leave any traces behind, no one would ever find out I'd been killed. My body shook as so many gruesome images came through my mind, and I silently prayed for it to just go away. "I ordered extra pork belly, but only got 1. The voice came right next to my ear. I shuddered from it being so close. It sounded low and hoarse and impossible to pin down a gender. If this monster had one, I couldn't believe I might be killed because we sent out one order short. I searched my mind trying to think of anything to say in order to save my life. When I didn't respond fast enough, it spoke again. "Do you have more in today?" it whispered. I risked turning my head slightly to see a face of pure darkness with a mouth showing rows of white teeth shining in the darkness. Yes," I said cautiously. It removed a hand from my shoulder and dug around in the darkness of its body for a moment. It looked like a tall figure dressed in some sort of black hooded fabric. The creature so large it really shouldn't fit inside the small kitchen. It pulled out its hand with long, deadly claws and held out a closed fist. I carefully held my hands out to accept whatever it was offering. Some bills and change dropped down into my expecting hands, and I stood frozen to the spot, confused and scared as hell. "One pork belly bowl, please. Extra pork belly," it whispered with a wide grin that caused my body to shake again. I looked around the empty kitchen, not expecting that kind of request. "Now?" I asked, knowing that was a dumb question. It tightened the grip on my arm to the point where it hurt a little. This thing could tear me apart without any effort, and made that fact clear. "Now, please." It did not need to repeat itself. I nodded, shoving the money in my pocket, not even checking the amount. My arm was released and I hurried along to get started on cooking. I knew how to make everything and we already had most of it prepped. I just needed to cook the rice. I flicked on a light and heard a small hiss. The monster nowhere in sight when the light came on, but I didn't trust it left for good. That was confirmed when I took out the lettuce and heard it ask to not have any in its bowl. I hurried along, warming up what was needed, and finished making the largest pork belly bowl the restaurant had ever seen. After all, we only had large rice pots. It was easier to make a large bowl. I made sure to load the bowl up with the desired meat, wondering how I'll explain the missing amount to my boss. With everything ready, I looked around trying to find the monster, wondering if I'd just imagined the whole thing. "Light, please," came a voice somewhere in the room. I quickly went over and turned off the kitchen lights again, and expected the massive creature I'd seen before show up. Instead, a small thing appeared at the counter, sitting in a chair I took from the restaurant. It looked exactly like the dark creature from before, just smaller. Only 4 feet tall, if that. Hands extremely small and tiny feet dangling off the chair. "Another empty bowl, please." It spoke in a softer voice that sounded much like a child, but I knew it was still the creature that could kill me, so I listened. I set a bowl down on the counter, and the small thing went to work filling it with some of its meal, making a smaller pork belly bowl. Tiny hands pushed the second bowl towards me, and patted the counter next to where it sat. Then the creature started to dig into the meal, feet kicking happily. This thing was sharing the meal I just made. After coming all the way here and requesting food after hours, it put aside some to share. I still felt some fear towards whatever that broke into the restaurant, but it was making it really hard to be overly worried for my life. I didn't eat dinner yet either, so I took the bowl and started to nibble on it, keeping my eyes on the creature. It ate fast, but also acted as if the food was too hot, which made sense. If it ordered food, any meal would have cooled down by the time it reached the creature. This might be the first time it ate so soon after the meal had been finished cooking. Halfway through the meal, it placed some more change on the counter, requesting an egg. We soft-boiled eggs ahead of time, so I grabbed one from the fridge. They normally warm up while sitting in with the rest of the hot dish. The monster didn't seem to mind the cold egg. In fact, it hesitated before placing more change down, requesting another egg. By the time it was down to the last bite of meat, the monster looked like it struggled to finish. I already finished my own and got started on washing the bowl. It didn't make sense to waste some takeout containers. I looked over my shoulder, not seeing the creature in the dark. I let out a very high-pitched scream when I felt something touch my leg. The thing had gotten off its chair and held out the empty bowl to be washed. My heart slowed back down to normal, and I accepted the dish from those tiny hands. With everything washed and out away, I wanted to leave as fast as possible. A tugging came at my pants, and I regretfully reached down to take the creature's small hand so we could leave. I found it didn't walk fast enough, so I needed to pick it up. It wasn't pleasant holding the creature. It may be the size and shape of a small child, but it felt like it was just meat wrapped in fabric without any bones in its body, like holding a room temperature pork roast wrapped in plastic. We made it outside, but now I was left holding a dark, creepy as hell monster in my arms, unsure of what to do next.
It's late. No more buses. I can walk you home,
it offered. The small thing slipped from my arms, and the body shifted into a taller shape, almost looking like an adult in a robed Halloween costume. The feet still appeared far too small to support the tall body. No, it's fine. I can walk home alone just fine, I said, hands out front, trying to refuse the offer as politely as possible.
It's not safe. Monsters come out at night,
the thing responded in the same low tone that caused my shoulders to tense. After a few seconds passed between us, I thought I heard a laugh. It took a few steps away and found the shadow, the body slowly sinking into the darkness to leave. I couldn't help but ask a question that had been bothering me. How do you, even have money or an address to buy food? I asked, staring at the smiling mouth that paused to face me.
I have a job, you know. Being this man-eating monster is just a hobby. Best not to go into all that, though. Being a monster is fun, but eating people can be such a hassle. Hobbies should be enjoyed, right? Anyway, I prefer eating takeout, but I'll change my mind if someone ever cheaps out on my pork belly again,
the dark shape said with a smile never leaving its face. Noted, I replied with a dry throat. I watched it leave into the dark shadow, praying we would never cross paths again. The next day I told my boss I made myself a meal to take home, and gave him the money for what had been used. He didn't care at all, and even told me I could take home a free meal by the end of the night if needed. At least that was one bullet dodged. After the incident, we started to get 2 orders a week of pork belly bowls with extra pork and extra eggs. We ran into being low on pork again, and I stopped my boss from sending out the orders short. I made the effort to call the number listed, only to get a text in response saying they would be fine waiting for more pork to be made, or substitute it with an egg or 2. The owner being so busy, he let me deal with the order. I finally got it sent out, and got a 5-star review later that night. Honestly, I would rather keep my life than the reviews. I really need to go back to school and get out of a job that deals with customers. You never really know who you'll be serving. This has been going on for a while now. At first it was harmless. Hell, it was even kind of funny, but now I'm scared and I don't know what to do. It started on a Monday afternoon. Greg leaned over his desk at me, grinning like a kid on Christmas, and said, "Dude, they installed a new vending machine. No more warm cans in my bag." I smiled back, mostly because Greg seemed genuinely excited about it. Me, I couldn't muster the same enthusiasm. I'm a broke college student, working this job for scraps of extra cash. So vending machines might as well be ATMs that charge you for looking. But hey, I was happy for him. By the time our break rolled around, Greg was practically vibrating with excitement. He bolted toward the vending machine like it was a long-lost love. I followed him mostly because it was on the way to the break room anyway. Now, the vending machine was different. Most machines have that clear front where you can see all the snacks and drinks lined up, just waiting to bankrupt you. This one wasn't like that. It was entirely red, shiny, metallic, and completely opaque. You couldn't see inside at all. Above the keypad was a simple list of drinks and snacks, and a faint red glow made the thing look like it was alive. Greg didn't seem to care. He jammed his spare change into the slot, punched in the number for a Diet Coke, and stood there, waiting with a dopey smile on his face. The machine hummed softly, and I could hear gears turning inside, twisting and shifting as it prepared his drink. It took longer than usual, like awkwardly long. I started to feel the drafty cold creeping in, and of course I sneezed. Great, just what I needed. A head cold on top of a miserable Monday. Finally the machine clunked and Greg crouched to grab his drink. "What the hell?" he muttered. "What?" I asked, stepping closer to see. He stood up, turning to me with a confused look on his face. In his hand wasn't a Diet Coke. It was a packet of tissues. Greg stared at the tissues in his hand, clearly disgruntled, but he just shrugged. "Must have punched in the wrong number," he muttered, tossing the pack at me before sulking off back to his desk. Weird. I didn't even know vending machines had tissues in stock, but whatever. I blew my nose, grateful for them anyway, and got back to work. Greg spent the rest of the afternoon pouting, griping about wasting his last bit of change on some bloody tissues, while sipping his warm Diet Coke like it was some kind of protest. The day dragged on as painfully slow as ever, and one by one, my colleagues packed up and headed out. I regretted taking overtime as soon as I realized I was the last one left in the office. But hey, a broke student's gotta do what they've gotta do, right? By the time I finally finished, it was pushing 7, and the hallway was eerily quiet as I made my way to the exit. Rain was hammering against the windows, long enough to make me groan. "Ugh," I muttered, pulling my thin jacket over my head in a pathetic attempt at protection. I was going to be soaked. Just as I reached for the door, I heard it. A noise. The vending machine's gears were turning again. The sound echoed through the empty office, weirdly loud in the dark silence. It made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. For a second, I just stood there, frozen, telling myself it was nothing. Machines settle sometimes, right? That's just what they do. Then came the thump. It wasn't the light clink of a soda can or the soft rustle of a pack of tissues. It was heavy, much heavier than anything I thought a vending machine could hold. Against my better judgment, and believe me, I knew this was dumb, I turned around and walked toward it. Let me tell you, I'd be the first to die in a horror movie. I crouched down, peering into the machine's dispensing bay. The item sitting there was too big to make sense, but I reached in anyway and gently pulled it out. It was an umbrella. The next day at work, I could hardly wait to tell Greg what had happened. I'd spent half the night tossing and turning, trying to figure it out, and by morning I'd convinced myself that the vending machine was some kind of experimental AI. Maybe it could somehow detect what you needed and just provide it. I wasn't super technical, so I didn't know exactly how that would work, but it was the only explanation that made sense. When Greg finally appeared and slumped into his chair, I leaned over and told him everything about the machine, the noise, and the umbrella. It didn't even ask for money, I added, trying to sound casual, but definitely failing. Greg raised an eyebrow, clearly still salty about wasting his spare change. "So you didn't even have to put anything in?" he asked, deadpan. "Nope," I said, grinning. "And I got a sweet umbrella, too. Held up against the rain perfectly. Didn't blow inside out or anything." Greg just grunted and went back to whatever he was doing, sipping his warm Diet Coke like it was a point of pride. Over the next few days, the vending machine became the center of office gossip. Everyone had a story about it. Mark, who forgot his gloves on a freezing morning, punched in a number and came away with a brand new pair. Sally, who was starting to get a migraine during a meeting, returned from the machine with 2 paracetamols. Sophie's phone was on its last legs, 2% maybe, and yep, the machine spat out a phone charger for her. It was bizarre. None of us could figure out how it worked. How would an AI, or whatever it was, know about Sally's headache or Sophie's phone battery? Theories flew around like confetti. Some people thought it was programmed with some crazy advanced algorithm. Others joked that it was possessed. It was impressive, but it was also unsettling. There was something about it that just didn't sit right with me. It wasn't anything I could put into words, exactly, just a feeling. Still, we kept using it. Curiosity won out over caution, as it usually does. Everyone, that is, except Greg. He hadn't forgiven the machine for stealing his last bit of change and replacing his Diet Coke with tissues. He continued to sip his warm soda defiantly, throwing occasional side-eye at the machine like it had personally wronged him. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. As amazing as it was, there was something about that vending machine that felt off. The items from the vending machine started getting weirder. It was subtle at first, but enough to make people uncomfortable. John was the first to mention it. He walked back to his desk one afternoon, holding a bloody bandage between 2 fingers like it was a dead rat. "Look what I just got," he said, half laughing, half grossed out. Everyone chuckled nervously, brushing it off as a glitch or a mistake, but later that day, John slammed his finger in the door frame so badly it split the skin. Angela's turn came a couple of days later. She walked up to the vending machine on her break, and instead of a snack or something useful, it spat out a photograph. It was of her, sitting in her car, completely unaware. Her laugh was shaky when she showed it around. "Okay, which one of you is screwing with me?" she asked, but no one confessed. Then there was Jessica. She didn't even get to make a joke about hers. She stood frozen next to the machine, holding up a small, delicate lock of blonde hair. It was eerily similar to her own. Everyone agreed it was strange, but we tried to laugh it off, like we always did. "Maybe it's possessed," Mark joked, earning a few strained chuckles. "It's trying to spook us for Halloween." But no one could quite shake the unease. The vending machine wasn't just helpful or quirky anymore. It was starting to feel personal. People got nervous, but they hid it behind sarcasm and half-hearted jokes. We told ourselves it was harmless, just a weird machine, nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I think we all knew it was only a matter of time before something worse happened. I was typing up a report when Megan, usually quiet and polite, stormed into the office screaming at the top of her lungs. "Is this some kind of sick joke? Do you think you're funny? Who did it?" Everyone looked up, startled. Megan was never like this. Concerned murmurs rippled through the room as she stomped toward her desk, still shouting. Her voice cracked with anger, or maybe fear, and before anyone could say a word, one of the managers hurried over and gently led her away. But as they left, something slipped from Megan's trembling hands and fluttered to the floor. I don't know why I grabbed it. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to make sense of the chaos. Either way, I snatched it up, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was an obituary for Megan. Her name, her face, her details, everything was printed there, and under date of death it said today. I just stared at it, heart pounding, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. Was this some kind of cruel prank? My first thought was the vending machine. Could it have done this? Before I could say anything, the manager led Megan out of sight, her sobs echoing down the hallway. After 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. Our office was right next to the exit, and the windows faced the street. I glanced out just in time to see Megan crossing the road toward the bus stop, still crying. I quickly looked away. It felt wrong to watch her, like I was invading her privacy. But then I heard it, a blaring car horn, the screech of tires skidding across the pavement, and a sickening thud. I whipped my head back to the window just in time to see Megan's crumpled body lying in the middle of the road. They said later that she'd been so upset she didn't look before stepping into the street, just walked right into the path of the car. The office was a mess after that. Management was understanding, giving us a few days off and offering counseling for those who needed it. There was an investigation into the note Megan found, but nothing came of it. No fingerprints, no evidence, and no one believed me when I mentioned the vending machine. They all said it had to be some kind of awful coincidence. Even so, no one went near the machine after that. No one wanted to take their chances. As the weeks passed, some sense of normalcy returned to the office. People were quieter, more subdued, but we managed to settle back into our routines. The vending machine was still there, looming in its corner like a grim reminder of everything that had happened. Most of us avoided it, treating it like it wasn't even there. I did my best to ignore it too, but it was hard. I was on my way to the bathroom one afternoon when I heard it, an unmistakable hum followed by the mechanical whir of gears turning. I froze. No one was using the vending machine. I was sure of it. The hum stopped, replaced by the dull thud of something landing in the collection bay. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, drew me closer. I reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was similar to the note Megan had found, but this wasn't an obituary. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, revealing 2 simple handwritten words. You're next. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the note, my legs rooted to the spot as cold dread seeped into my bones. I didn't need to ask what it meant. I think I'm going to die. I haven't been to work in days, too terrified to return. I'm posting this here hoping someone has experienced something similar or knows anything at all that might save my life. Please. I need help. I first learned about the curse when I was 12. While I was at my uncle's funeral, I heard the adults talking in hushed tones, whispering about who they thought the next one would be. Every time I asked them, they got quiet or made up excuses that they were talking about something else. When we got home, I asked my mom about what I'd heard. Her face went pale, but then she sighed. I suppose you're old enough to know, she said. Our family is cursed. No one knows exactly how or why it started, but whenever someone dies, 2 more will follow in the same calendar year. This includes people who married into the family. Do you remember when your grandpa died last month? I nodded. My grandpa hadn't been terribly old, but he had died at the age of 67 due to heart failure. He refused to go to the hospital or visit any doctors, although we suspected he'd had several heart attacks throughout the years. Your grandpa was the first, and now your uncle, although it wasn't his time, was the second. My uncle married into my dad's side of the family. He never drank or did drugs, but he was always the life of any family gathering or party we had. One day he was driving home in the evening when there was a freak accident. A traffic light had malfunctioned and showed green on all sides. He'd been T-boned by another driver, and although the other driver walked away without a scratch, my uncle had died on the spot. "Who's going to be the third?" I asked. "We don't know. If the curse is merciful this time, it will take someone who's ready to go. There's no guarantee." I searched my mom's face for any sign she was joking, but she seemed completely serious. Could I be the next one? Her face softened. "Of course not. You're still a child. I've never seen the curse go after any children before. You'll be fine." I thought my mom was being dramatic and overthinking things. There was no such thing as a curse, and this one sounded ridiculous. As the year wore on, no one else died. Then we got to December. My elderly aunt died at the ripe old age of 93 due to natural causes. There were more whispers and relief about her being the third, but I paid no mind to it. It was just a coincidence. Several years later, one of my older cousins died from complications of a chronic disease they'd had their entire life. The family started up their rumors again about who would be next. I paid it no mind because I still believed it was ridiculous. A few months later, an uncle I'd never met died from old age. The whispers of the curse continued to swirl. Then my life turned upside down a few months later when my dad had a heart attack. He was only 43. He was rushed to the hospital and the doctors managed to save him, but said he would never be the same. He likely wouldn't live more than a few more years at best. They wanted to get him a heart transplant, but he refused. The couple in the room next to his were watching their loved one die because his body rejected the transplanted heart, and it was horrific. They told us if only they'd known this would happen, they gladly would have taken the few years he had left instead of watching him die like this. My dad said he would never take that chance, and would rather enjoy the life his body had left to give him. Relatives filtered in and out, whispering about how he had cheated the curse and what would happen now. Would it find another victim? Would my dad still die that year somehow? Would it take 2 more victims as punishment? Nobody knew. Anytime they talked about the curse around me, I tried my best to shut it down. They were all acting like children with this curse nonsense. We almost got to the end of the year with nothing else happening. Then towards the end of December, my great aunt slipped on a patch of black ice while coming out of church. She broke her neck and died instantly. The other relatives seemed relieved that there was a third and my dad hadn't somehow cheated the curse and made it worse. My brother was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder that same year, and some whispered how that must have been my dad's punishment for surviving. I didn't understand how the adults could be so cruel to say things like that, especially to my brother. My dad made it 10 more years before he couldn't hold on anymore. A month later, his mother, my grandmother, had a stroke and died as well. It wasn't entirely unexpected. She'd had several strokes over the years, and the pain of losing Dad, her youngest child, must have been bad. I graduated college and moved across the country a few months after, along with my brother and my mom. I was fed up with the relatives and all their nonsense. Beyond just the curse business, they like to stir up drama. We decided we would leave my dad's side of the family and their curse behind, and cut contact with most of them. My brother and I didn't want any of our potential future kids to experience any of what we had to go through. Although I had to admit, I was starting to wonder about the curse. Was it really just a coincidence that people in our family kept dying in threes? Later that year, I heard one of my cousins I kept in touch with that her dad was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer. They treated it as aggressively as possible since he was so young, but he died only a month after they got the news. Like me, she was also ticked off about the relatives saying it was because of the curse, but she also cut contact with them. About 10 years passed with no drama. I really thought we'd left all that behind. My brother got married and had 2 kids, and I'm still looking for the right person. I got a job as a nurse, and I live across town from my brother and help him manage his autoimmune condition and sometimes watch the kids. I love being an aunt, and I can't wait to start my own family someday. A few months ago, we had a bit of a tragedy on my mom's side of the family. Her mom, my grandma, had been declining in health over the last 8 years and was in a nursing home for the last year before she finally passed away. My mom's younger brother took this really hard. He had a ton of health conditions he was born with, and he had already outlived the life expectancy given to him by the doctors. It wasn't a shock when he passed a few months after, but it was very sad. I'm going to move in with Dad for a while, my mom had told me. I don't want the shock of losing his wife and only son to kill him. I don't want him to be the third. Are you really still on about that curse? I asked. It wasn't even from your side of the family. It was from Dad's. No, you're right. There's no curse, she acquiesced. But that doesn't mean the shock couldn't still kill your grandpa. I don't want to lose both my parents and my brother in the same year. My mom went back to live with him. This left me, my brother, and his family alone over here. A few months later, in November, his kids both got sick with something nasty and passed it to my brother and his wife. I'll admit, although I didn't believe in the curse, I was a little on edge because of it. Since he had an autoimmune disorder, he had to be on medications to stop his immune system from working properly so it didn't continue to attack his body. This meant that his weakened immune system wasn't strong enough to fight off a lot of common illnesses, so he needed a lot of rest and medications to help fight even a simple cold. I know my body is strong enough to fight off whatever germs his kids have, so I've been going over there every day after work to help so he can rest. Since I'm a nurse, I've been exposed to enough illnesses that I'm immune to most germs anyway. It's been a week and they're all recovering well, even my brother. I think I'm starting to get sick though. It came on pretty fast. I was fine this morning, but now that I'm going to bed, I spiked a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. I've also got terrible muscle aches and chills. My throat is killing me and my face and chest turn bright red. I was totally fine a few hours ago. I probably just need to sleep it off. I'll take some Tylenol to help with the fever and pain, and I'm sure I'll feel much better when I wake up. I'm only 29, so I'm strong enough to fight this off. I'll post an update once we all recover from this illness, so you'll know we're fine and there is no curse. Last online, 12 days ago. The girl who knew too much. The first time I met Grace, she was sitting on the curb outside my house, cradling a stuffed animal with its seams coming apart. I thought she looked lonely. I was 7 years old, and naive enough to believe that everyone just wanted a friend. She turned to me as I approached, her dark eyes locking onto mine like she already knew everything about me. "Want to play?" she asked, tilting her head with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sure," I said, shrugging. We played catch at first, but it didn't take long before she started making up rules. Rules that made no sense. "You have to throw with your left hand or you're cheating," she said. "If you miss the ball, you owe me something." "What would I owe you?" I asked, confused. Her grin widened. "I'll tell you later." Over the next few months, Grace became a regular presence in my life. She lived a few streets over and her parents were always busy, so she'd show up unannounced, ready to play. At first, I didn't mind, but the games started to get strange. One day she brought over a leash with no dog attached. "Let's play vet," she said. When I told her I didn't know how, she grabbed my arm and squeezed hard enough to leave marks. "Just do what I say," she hissed. I didn't like Grace much after that, but avoiding her wasn't easy. She had a way of showing up exactly when I wanted to be left alone. My mom thought she was sweet and told me I should be nice to her because she didn't have many friends. "You're her favorite person," Mom would say, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. Then came the day Grace accused me of stealing her puppy. I didn't even know she had a puppy. She marched up to me during recess, her face red with anger, and shouted, "You took him. I saw you." "What are you talking about?" I stammered, feeling every pair of eyes on the playground turn toward me. "You took him from my yard. You're a thief." She grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the teacher, shouting about how I'd broken into her house and stolen her dog. The teacher separated us and sent us to the principal's office, but no matter how much I denied it, Grace stuck to her story. "He even tried to hide the collar in his room," she said, her voice trembling with fake tears. The principal didn't believe her, thankfully, but the damage was done. The other kids started calling me dog thief and avoiding me. My mom said I should make peace with Grace. When I told her I hadn't done anything wrong, she just sighed and muttered something about me needing to learn how to get along with others. I tried to stay away from Grace after that, but she wouldn't leave me alone. One day she cornered me in the alley behind our school. Her expression was cold, her hands hidden behind her back. "You need to learn to listen," she said before shoving me to the ground. I didn't see the knife until it was too late. The blade was small, more like a letter opener, but the pain was sharp and immediate. I screamed and tried to fight her off, but she was stronger than she looked. By the time she ran off, my shirt was soaked in blood and I could barely move. When I got home, my mom was furious. Not at Grace, but at me. "What did you do to make her so angry?" she demanded as she cleaned the wound. "You're always causing trouble." I wanted to tell her everything, but what was the point? No one believed me when it came to Grace. Years passed, and I didn't see Grace again until high school. By then, I had almost convinced myself that she was just a bad memory, something my mind had exaggerated to explain the scars on my arm and the pit in my stomach. But then she walked into my study hall like nothing had happened. She smiled at me, that same unsettling grin, and sat down across the table. "Hey, remember me?" My stomach dropped. "What do you want?" "To be friends," she said like it was the most natural thing in the world. I spent the rest of the semester avoiding her, but she seemed to be everywhere. At lunch, in the hallways, even at the convenience store where I worked weekends. It was like she was haunting me, reminding me that no matter how much time had passed, she still had control. One day she showed up at the register with a pack of gum and a sly smile. "You've gotten better at hiding," she said, sliding the money across the counter. "But you can't hide forever." I didn't respond. I couldn't. That night I dreamed of the attic in my childhood home. I hadn't been up there since I was a kid, but in the dream, it was exactly as I remembered. Cold, dark, and filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own. In the corner was a box, and when I opened it, there was the leash Grace had brought over all those years ago. Only this time it wasn't empty. Inside was the collar of a puppy, its tag etched with a single word: promise. I woke up drenched in sweat, the sound of Grace's laughter echoing in my ears. She hasn't shown up again, not yet, but sometimes when I'm alone, I feel like someone's watching me, and every now and then, I hear a faint tapping at my window. I took the job at the fire lookout station because I needed the solitude. The quiet isolation of the woods promised a reprieve from the chaos of the outside world. It was supposed to be just me and my coworker, Brad, alternating shifts while watching for signs of wildfires. The forest was a cathedral of endless green, and the station, perched atop its tower, felt like a sanctuary. But now, as I write this, I wonder if solitude was what the woods had planned for me all along. The first 3 weeks were uneventful. Brad and I barely spoke beyond exchanging pleasantries during shift changes. He was the seasoned veteran. I was the newbie. His confidence in the job bordered on arrogance, but I didn't mind. I liked the silence. One night during his shift, I woke to the sound of the door slamming. When I stepped out of my bunk, Brad was already gone. His radio sat on the desk, the red light blinking softly. That wasn't like him. Protocol was to keep it on at all times. I tried calling for him, but only static replied. The hours dragged. Morning came and went, but Brad didn't return. By evening, I climbed down the tower to look for him, even though every instinct screamed against it. The woods felt wrong. The bird song was absent. The wind moved through the trees without sound, as if it didn't dare disturb the silence. I called Brad's name until my throat hurt. When I finally turned back toward the tower, I found myself relieved to leave the forest behind. That night, the knocking started. It was faint at first, a soft tap, tap, tap on the wooden floor. I assumed it was a branch swaying in the wind, but when I opened the door, nothing was there. Just the forest, dark and unyielding. The knocking came again, louder, more insistent. I stayed inside. The following night I woke to screaming, a raw, guttural wail that echoed through the forest. It was Brad's voice. He was begging for help. I grabbed the radio. "Brad, where are you? Are you okay?" Static. Then his voice again, faint and wet, as though he was speaking through a mouthful of blood. "Help me, please." I froze. His voice wasn't coming from the radio. It was outside, just below the tower. I looked out the window. The forest was empty, bathed in the cold silver of the moonlight. Then I saw it. Shadows moving between the trees, unnaturally fast, darting from trunk to trunk. One of them stopped at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head cocked at an impossible angle. It seemed to watch me, its form quivering like heat waves on a summer road. I turned off the lights and didn't move until dawn. The following day I woke to find the forest ablaze. Flames roared through the treetops, orange and yellow, licking the sky. Smoke rose in a thick column, blotting out the sun. I reached for the radio, my hands trembling, and called for help, but as I spoke, the fire disappeared. One moment it was there, a hellish inferno. The next, the forest was still and dark, as if the fire had been a mirage. Then Brad came back. I spotted him at dusk, walking up the trail toward the tower. Relief hit me like a wave, but something about his gait was off. His steps were stiff, jerky, like a marionette on tangled strings. "Brad?" I called out, my voice breaking. He didn't answer. When he reached the base of the tower, he stopped. His head tilted up slowly, unnaturally, and for the first time, I saw his face, or what was left of it. His skin hung in tatters. His eyes were gone, and his mouth twisted into a grin too wide for any human face. "Come down," he said. His voice was a mockery of Brad's. "I need your help." I stayed inside. He knocked on the tower's door. His knuckles scraped against the wood, slow and deliberate. Then he started screaming, begging, crying. I pressed my hands to my ears and prayed for morning. The tower is no longer safe. Whatever was outside grew bolder. Shadows darted closer, circling the base of the tower. The knocking turned into pounding. Screams filled the night, echoing from all directions. Sometimes they were Brad's, sometimes they were my mother's, or my ex-girlfriend's, or voices I didn't recognize. The door held, until it didn't. I woke up in a hospital bed. my arms restrained. A nurse stood over me, her smile too kind, her eyes too pitying. "You had an episode," she said. "You've been here for weeks." "No," I whispered. "I was in the tower. Brad." "There is no Brad," she said gently. "You were working alone." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Was it all in my head? The shadows, the fire, the knocking? But then I saw it. Across the room on the window's glass, a faint handprint, too large to be human, too high to have come from outside, and behind the nurse, the shadows were moving. For years, my family and I have all experienced the same things. Not like normal deja vu, but I can tell my dad, who he talked to at work yesterday 300 miles away. Everyone has a story. They're always written off as dreams. When I was a kid, my mom busted me for partying. She woke up in the middle of the night and called me. I'll never forget the tone in her voice when she recalled exactly what I had done. "I told you not to hang out with those two. They're always drinking that cheap beer and they brought that girl with them." That girl was my current addiction, and thankfully she didn't mention the things I had tried to do, or wanted to do, that is. I know she knew because I would have known. Maybe that's just her intuition wanting to preserve her baby's innocence. After all, we were all high schoolers once. The ones that really sit hard are the older generations. My grandpa used to tell the story of when he was deployed to France. Of course, he wasn't in the war. He's far too young. His dad was a hero, though. I've seen his medals and read about him in my history books. That's never how I heard the stories, though. Do you know what it's like to hear a mother scream? That sound when her baby dies in her arms? They weren't supposed to be there. It was only supposed to be Germans. It's not my fault they got caught in the fire. It's the Jerry's. They shouldn't have been there. We should have checked. My grandpa would talk in ways that would make you think he was suffering just like the boys that made it back. But that's nothing new. We all suffer from what they call lucid dreams and night terrors. But I would swear it's real. I felt the joy of my mother when she held her child for the first time. I felt the grief of losing a pet long before I was born. That's just our curse. Now my daughter is involved. They say a parent should never have to bury their child, but I wish that's all I had to do. She was 4, out playing in my dad's back 40, just being a kid. What she didn't know was how to identify a copperhead. I'll never forget the scream of its fangs tearing into her little sausage arms. The doctor said she was lucky. We got her to them in time, and it hadn't deposited all of its venom. It was a defensive bite. She must have stepped on it by accident. The medicine would keep her asleep for a while, so we should get some rest. Obviously, we couldn't leave her there, so I curled up in the dad chair, and my wife had a cot brought in. No sooner did I drift off to a restless sleep did my arm start to burn. I was jolted awake by the feeling of 4 knives entering my forearm and setting it to light from the inside. I caught my breath and made sure no one else was disturbed by my noise. Sarah was awake. "Daddy, can you turn on the light? I'm scared." She never did like the dark. In her time of need, I would have taken the roof off this hospital if I could to brighten up the room. I switch on the light and wrap my bare paw around her hand. "Don't worry, sweetie. There's nothing that can get you while I'm here." I must have dozed off there with her. I was running through the woods. Everything felt so large. The trees must have been 40 feet tall. In the distance I could hear something, but couldn't quite make it out. The creek was so big. I tried to jump it, but my boots got wet. I caught a rock and woke up from a sensation of falling. Her hand was cold. The doctors told me that was normal, slowed heart rate to prevent the spread of the toxin. The next day we went home. She was still exhausted as we all were. I carried her into her room, laid her on her bed, and placed a kiss on her cheek. As I turned to leave, a weak little voice in the darkness pleaded, "Get the light, Daddy." "Of course, sweetie," as I plugged in her Sesame Street nightlight. My wife and I went to bed, waking up every hour to check on her. Never did get much sleep. We agreed that I should take a couple hours and then we'd switch. When I finally drifted off, it was dark. I had a feeling like something was sitting on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I tried everything, but I couldn't move either. My hands were pinned to my sides and there was something on top of me. I woke up screaming, nothing like my wife though. She came rushing in to tell me we had to go. Now. By the time we got to the hospital, it was too late. Doctor said it was an allergic reaction. To what, we don't know. All I can remember are those little bear pajamas that she loved and her favorite blanket. Her grandmother made that. The last thing she did. She knew she wouldn't get to meet my daughter, but wanted her to always know that Grandma was there with her to protect her. It's times like this a man needs his mom. It must have been 2 days without sleep. I couldn't get that feeling out of my mind that I failed. My only job was to protect her. It couldn't have been that hard, but somehow I failed. My wife suggested something to help me sleep, said something about making plans tomorrow, so I needed my rest. The warm blanket of Ambien overwhelmed me and I fell asleep on her floor. Darkness again. This time it was cold. I don't know why I was cold. I must have been under a pretty thick blanket. The blanket moves and I'm blinded by the white lights. There are people walking around me, speaking in words I can't understand. There is no noise. I can't move. I feel trapped. All I want is to see my mother again. I feel like I need to cry, but I can't. I feel a familiar blanket laid on top of me and I'm tucked in. I can't make out the face responsible, but it's warm. It's safe. I get a kiss on the head and my bed slides into darkness. There's a loud thud when a door closes and the voices are muffled. So many tears. I can still feel the blanket, but I'm only getting colder. My wife wakes me up the next morning to get dressed. She's laid out a blazer and a tie. We go to the funeral home and start to make decisions. Isn't my daughter supposed to be doing this for me? We get led to a back room where everything seems to shrink. The largest casket couldn't have been more than 4 feet. So many colors and designs. If not for the setting, it would have almost been joyful. My wife walks to one with the lovable cast of her favorite show. I'll never see them the same, puppets or not. They look like they understood and they wanted to help. Nothing can help now. We sign some documents, exchange forced pleasantries, and go about our way. The rest of the day is a blur. I go through the motions. We have dinner, quiet again. I help with the dishes. All of the plates are the same size. We try to watch something to take our minds off everything, but the remote is buried in the toy box. I take another Ambien and decide if I can't do anything else right, at least I can sleep. I'm laying on a bed with a weird man walking around me. He writes something down and stabs my side. I feel a rush of liquid, but it doesn't hurt. I see him pull my favorite clothes out of the box on the counter. I would love to help him get me dressed, but I can't move. He brings over a brush, and I want to tell him I'm not allowed to wear makeup. My mom wouldn't like that. He closes my eyes, and it's dark again. My bed gets slid into another room. I feel a stuffed animal tucked under my arm. It feels safe. Maybe the dark isn't all that bad. I hear the door close, but above me? What kind of door is above me? We all meet at the cemetery. My dad hugs me, the first time in forever. I can feel him crying into me. I could tell we shared the same feeling of failure. That must be primal. I hold my wife's hand as we all up and place the flowers. The preacher says something about the weight of small caskets, and my baby girl is lowered out of sight. That night is rained. The thunder usually helps me sleep, but I can't get the image of that little red casket out of my mind. Another Ambien. There's people crying. I don't know them, but they feel familiar. I feel like I'm flying, but down. Floating, I guess. Something hits the top of my room. A lot of something. It gets quieter the more it happens. Then it's just quiet and dark. It's so dark. I try to squeeze the stuffed animal but can't move my arms. These days it's more of the same. Wake up, go to work, pretend to be okay, Ambien, sleep. Every night is just cold darkness. It scares me. I can't explain, but I'm always filled with a terror when I return to my dream and it's only darkness. I wish I could turn on a light. They always say the hardest thing a person can do is bury their child. At least, that's where it ends for them. Let me just start this by saying, if you're looking for a big confrontation or a satisfying conclusion, I'm sorry, but I don't have one. I am a junior in a university in a small town in northern British Columbia. The population is no larger than 200 people. It's currently summer break and I'm working at the only grocery store in town as a stock boy to save up some extra cash for the upcoming semester. The store was open and ran by a local family called the McLeans. The founder, Jim, took over the store 30 years ago after the local superstore decided to sell it to the family after about 10 years of making no money. After Jim retired, he left the store in the hands of his two sons, Rob and Carl. I think Carl handles the business side, accounting and marketing, stuff like that. But Rob is the day-to-day store supervisor. As an employee, I almost never see Carl. The few times I have met him, he seems nice enough, if not distant. And when he's around, Rob, he gets quiet and looks extremely uncomfortable. That isn't out of the ordinary, though. Spend enough time around Rob and you'll wish you hadn't. It's hard to describe, but have you ever met anyone who's really nice and polite on the surface, but you look into their eyes and just feel deep unease for a reason you can't quite put your finger on? That's Rob. The store is the only place in town where people, mostly senior citizens, can do their grocery shopping. The store itself is definitely the largest building in town, but that's not saying much since we all have to compete with a gas station at the edge of our parking lot and a Chinese food restaurant that's been there seemingly since before documented human history. The rest of the town is just houses, sheds, a single baseball diamond, and outdoor hockey rink. A few kilometers out of town is the sawmill that employs 95% of the population of our town. In fact, my dad works there, and his dad worked there, and his dad's dad also worked there. My father is utterly confused as to why I chose to go to a fancy general studies course at the University of British Columbia instead of taking up the family tradition of back-breaking labor for 30 years straight. The only claim to fame we have here is the murders that happened here a little over a year ago. Not much has been released to the public because the investigation is still ongoing, but word spreads like wildfire in small towns like this. The few young people living here like to make their own theories because this is by far the most exciting thing that's happened here since the town's inception. I personally don't like to talk about that stuff because frankly it freaks me out. The little information I know about the case is basically local legend and the occasional news updates on the store radio I hear from time to time. There's about 20 people total on staff at the store, but that has dropped to around 15 in the last 3 weeks due entirely to people quitting. Some people left amicably, and others not so much. Now, like I said, Rob is a nice man on the surface and very patient with his staff when it comes to mistakes made while on the job, but he has been known to have an extreme temper at seemingly random things. A story that first comes to mind is this girl used to work here a few months back. She was chewed out by the cranky old lady at cash one night over the price of some cat food, and after the old lady left, she called her a nasty old B word to some of her coworkers, and Rob overheard. Rob then asked her to join him in his office and screamed at her so loudly the other workers at the front of the store heard every word of his unhinged verbal barrage. She left crying and quit a week later. Something else that added to the bizarre nature of the exchange was Rob himself has called rude customers mean names all the time. So why did this one crabby old lady spark such fury? That's when I really started looking at Rob differently, and started picking up on weird behaviors that originally flew over my head. But the last straw, and what made me decide to write this story out, was what happened last week. To give some context, we are dead almost constantly. Our busiest day is Saturday, when everyone in town needs to do their weekly shopping, and even then it's not that bad. Since it's dead so often, me and the only other stock boy here, Tony, who comes in high more often than not, don't really put much care into the displays, and so the shelves are often a bit underwhelming. Rob doesn't really care about the presentation of products, because we are the only grocery store in town. Why would we need to show off with immaculate displays of perfect shelving? So it's not uncommon going down the aisles that things will be in the wrong place or flipped around or whatever. That is except for one part of the store. We don't really have a toys section, but we do have an aisle of dolls. All kinds of them, from Barbie dolls to Raggedy Ann dolls. This is the only part of the store Rob demands stay perfect. Every doll facing forward, lined perfectly with not a hair on a single doll's head in the wrong place. Last Wednesday we had maybe 10 customers all day, which is actually pretty busy for a weekday, with the harsh fluorescent lighting of the high ceiling and the same 3 radio pop songs playing over the loudspeakers all day while staring at the identical aisles over and over for 8 hours straight can drive a man to what I can only describe as hypnotic madness. So when I got to doll aisle, I gave it a lazy once-over and continued on. A couple minutes later, when I was at the brink of dissociation, in the canned soup aisle, I was shook out of my haze when I heard my name being screamed out, as if they had just discovered me laying dead on the floor. It was Rob. Seems that in my half-asleep march, I didn't notice one of the dolls had fallen on its side on a shelf. It should have been sitting up like all the others. When Rob pointed this out to me, he gave me a look that made my blood run cold. His eyes looked like a hungry panther staring down a wounded deer. "Do you want to tell me what you think you're doing?" Rob said, never breaking eye contact. "Oh, sorry, I must have missed that. Let me fix it," I said, shakily, trying to get out of the situation as fast as possible. I reached quickly over and tried to prop up the knocked-over doll when Rob put his massive hand on my chest to stop me, pushing me back. "Do you know that some of these dolls were made before you were born, and you come in here and disrespect them like this?" Rob said, his face getting redder with every word. "Look, I'm sorry. I genuinely didn't see that, but you don't have to shout. It's not that big of a deal. The rest of the aisle looks perfect," I said, trying my best to calm him down. He looked at me for what felt like 30 minutes, with a cold stare, as if he was going to wrap his massive hands around my throat at any second. Then, as if flipping a switch, his mood completely changed. "No worries, pal." He gave me a pat on the shoulder that I think was meant to be friendly, but was just hard enough to be menacing. "Just make sure to keep an eye out in the future. Keep up the good work." He looked above me robotically and walked away without saying another word. I was left there frozen in the aisle, utterly perplexed as to what just happened. I've worked customer service long enough to get used to being yelled at. I think anyone who has worked any form of customer service has had angry customers yell and swear at them, and over time you just learn to get over it and laugh it off most of the time. But the way Rob looked at me when he was yelling, to give you a better mental picture, Rob is a huge man. He's about 6'7", give or take 300 pounds. Having him yell in my face was like a gorilla preparing for a brutal attack. I stood in the aisle motionless for what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than a few seconds when one of the cashiers, Holly, walked up to check if I was all right. "Is he crazy?" she asked with a sympathetic yet angry tone. It's okay. I'm fine. I think he's just on edge because a few people have quit these last few weeks," I said, as if trying to convince myself that this interaction was somehow normal. "Yeah, I wonder why," Holly added, smiling. Holly always had a way to make me feel better. She had blonde hair and green eyes, and looked straight out of a high-fashion magazine. After our nice little chat, I didn't see Rob on the floor for the night, but I saw him in his office when I was walking to my locker in the break room after finishing up. He was mumbling to himself something I couldn't quite make out, but it looks like he was angry. Not angry at me or anything, but angry with himself. Holly was in the break room grabbing her stuff right next to Rob's office. I wanted to tell him off, saying something like, "You ever put your hands on me or anyone else, I'll kick your butt." But who was I kidding? With one hand, he could fling me across the room like one of his precious dolls. Besides, I needed this job to save up for school, so I don't have to come back to this crappy store ever again. So with gritted teeth, I said, "Good night, Rob." He turned as if snapped out of a trance and said, "Good night, buddy. See you tomorrow." I walked with my head swiveling back to my car. Sometimes I give Tony a ride to and from work, mostly because he's usually too high to drive, but I also like his company. He's funny and gives almost no craps about the job or where he's going in a refreshing sort of way. Why should I stress if he isn't? "I heard you almost got your butt kicked by Rob last night," he said once he settled into the passenger seat of my car. "Yeah, it was the dolls," I replied with a sigh. "Freaky dolls, man," Tony added as he was fiddling with my car radio, trying to get his Bluetooth to work. When we pulled up to the store, the parking lot was empty except for Rob and Holly's car. After we park and start walking up to the store, I notice Holly is still sitting in her car, hand hanging out the window, holding a still burning cigarette, as she stares off into space, not even acknowledging Tony and I as we walk past. Once we are inside and clocked in, Rob is sitting at his desk in the same position as if he had been there all night without moving a muscle. I think he might apologize for last night, but to be honest, I don't want him to. I have always felt awkward about apologies for some reason. I would much prefer we just move on like nothing happened. Walking out onto the floor, I crossed paths with Holly, getting a better look at her. It's clear she had been crying from her puffy cheeks, and her normally beautiful green eyes had a hint of red and exhaustion, as if she hadn't slept in days. "Derrick, good morning," Chris, the assistant manager, said as he appeared out of thin air, scaring me into near cardiac arrest. "Man, we gotta put a bell on you or something," I said, catching my breath. "It's 10 a.m., Derrick. That means the store is open and we use only professional language on the floor," he responded as if there was literally anyone in the store at all. "Right, sorry. Bad habit," I said, hoping he would just tell me what to do and leave as fast as possible. "Daniel called in sick again this morning. We have only one cashier. I am gonna get Tony to replace him on cash with Holly, so I am gonna need you to do backstock inventory on your own today," Chris said, tapping his pen on his clipboard. I felt a sudden rush of dread, partly because I hated doing inventory, but mostly because I wanted to talk with Holly, maybe figure out what was bothering her. Do you really want Tony handling cash unattended? I asked with a raised eyebrow. Chris thought for a moment. Good point. You're on cash. Tony can handle backstock. Sometimes it pays to have degenerate friends. When I got to the registers, it took another 20 or so minutes before Holly reappeared from the back. It looked like she had been crying even more now. Maybe that's why she took so long to come out. We sat in awkward silence for what felt like 4 hours, but couldn't have been longer than 5 minutes when Chris, ever the most vigilant and compassionate soul, came by and barely looked either of us in the eyes as he explained what tasks around the registers he wanted us to complete. Once he left, I finally mustered up the courage to ask Holly what was wrong.
It was a rough night, she began. When I got home,
She was interrupted by the slam of a large box of industrial-grade garbage bags hitting the counter in front of me. What was standing at my counter was a lanky white man in a black trench coat and large leather boots that added about half an inch to his already immense height. Seems in my anxious desire to spark a conversation with Holly, I had completely missed this lamp-post-sized, hollow-looking figure walking in. Find everything okay today? I began the first part of the script I had read what seemed like 1,000,000 times, not even looking at him. He said nothing. When I was done ringing through his garbage bags and went to tell him his total, I finally met his eyes. I felt a jolt of fear shoot through me like a stray bullet. He was looking directly into my eyes with a look of fury and hatred, as if he took extreme offense to the fact that I just existed in front of him. "That'll be 1955, please," I said, trying my best not to show my ever-growing fear. He handed me a crumpled-up $20 bill, and as I was opening the register to get him his change, I could feel him staring at me like someone was poking me in the back of the head with a red-hot iron. I handed him his change, and he only broke his death stare as he began to walk away. As I watched him leave, a wave of relief and adrenaline washed over me, like I had narrowly escaped being hit by a car. I snapped back into the reality of my conversation I was having with Holly, but when I turned to face her again, she was gone, leaving her cash register vacant. Did the weird tall guy freak her out too? As soon as the question popped up in my brain, Tony came around the corner, stomping towards me. "That weird tall guy just messed up the whole bathroom," he shouted as if I had something to do with it. "What do you mean?" I replied. "Come look," Tony said, waving me over. As we walked into the bathroom, I felt my heart sink into my shoes. Written on the bathroom mirror in black marker, with text so big you could barely see your own reflection, were the words, "I am not done." The letters were scribbled in such a way that made it clear how intensely he had been writing. The same line would have markings over and over as if he wrote it 100 times in the same spot. "That's not all," Tony said after a long, shocked silence. He then opened the stall door and revealed he had also written it all over the walls, floor, and even the toilet. "I am not done, I am not done, I am not done," over and over again for what looked like 1,000,000 times. I had no idea what to think. I have seen vandalism, dicks drawn on walls, crude messages, but nothing even remotely like this. It's as if someone had a psychotic break and just wrote it all out in an attempt to release whatever beast lay dormant inside of them. After leaving the bathroom and getting back to my register, I barely even noticed Holly was back. Chris was yelling at me for leaving the register unattended, but I could barely hear him over the sound of my heart beating in my chest as my mind raced for a rational explanation. My mind only began to focus when I heard a news bulletin on the radio at the customer service desk. They found a body. It started with the newcomers. A family, a mother, father and 2 children, moved into the old house at the end of Maple Street a month ago. It was the kind of house that everyone avoided. People whispered about the strange disappearances that had occurred there over the years, the odd lights seen flickering in the windows long after the place had been abandoned. But when the family moved in, the rumors stopped. The house was suddenly normal again, and the neighborhood sighed in relief. At least, that's how it seemed. The family, Robert, Claire, and their children, Sarah and Lucas, seemed perfect. Robert was tall, athletic, and friendly, always willing to chat with the neighbors. Claire was quiet but kind, with a way of making you feel at ease. The children were well-behaved, polite, and always on their best manners. They didn't act like normal kids. They didn't play loudly or run around. They were always together and always a little too quiet. I first noticed it when I walked past their house one evening. Sarah, the older girl, was standing by the fence, staring into the street. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, as if she was watching something far in the distance. I waved, but she didn't react. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off. It was just the oddness of a new neighbor. But over the next few weeks, the unease didn't go away. It grew. The family was always together. Robert and Claire never seemed to go anywhere without their kids. They were always in the yard, always walking to the park. Always perfect. But something was wrong. Robert never seemed to sleep. I'd often see him sitting outside staring at the stars for hours, his eyes unblinking, his posture rigid. It was unsettling. And Claire, she never seemed to make eye contact in a normal way. Her smile always felt a little too wide, her expression a little too calm. I remember seeing her in the grocery store once, walking down the aisle, and for a moment, I could have sworn she wasn't even looking at the shelves. Her gaze was fixed on something far beyond what was right in front of her. The kids, too, were strange. They never laughed or argued like typical children. They played, but it was always in perfect synchronization, swinging on the swings together, pacing around the yard, but never a sound. It was almost like they were doing it out of habit, like puppets pulling at invisible strings. One evening I walked by their house again, and this time I saw Sarah standing in the same spot by the fence, staring at me. But she wasn't just looking at me, she was watching me. Her eyes seemed to follow my every movement, and I felt a chill crawl up my back. When I turned to look away, I heard her voice, soft, barely a whisper. "You don't get it, do you?" I froze, heart racing. I turned back quickly, but she was gone. There was no one in the yard. It was then I realized that something wasn't right. Something had always been wrong with them, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The days dragged on. I tried to talk to Sophie, my wife, about the family, but she just shrugged it off. "You're overthinking it, honey," she said. "They're just new neighbors." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly off. Every time I saw them, I felt watched, like something was waiting for me to notice. The longer they stayed, the more unnerving it became. Then one night, I had a visit. It was late, past midnight, when I heard the knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Sophie was still working late. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. I opened the door, and there stood Claire, holding a basket of freshly baked bread. "I thought you might like some," she said, her voice too smooth, too soft. "It's homemade." I smiled, trying to hide my unease. "Thanks, that's very kind of you." She handed me the basket, and I noticed her eyes, too calm, too intense. I looked down at the bread in my hands, feeling a strange pressure in the air. "Is everything okay?" I asked, almost without thinking. Claire tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving mine. "Yes," she said softly, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Everything is perfect. There was an awkward silence, and I forced myself to look away. Thanks again. I'll let you get back inside, I said quickly, trying to close the door, but she didn't move. Her smile didn't falter. We've been watching you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. Watching me? Before I could say anything else, she stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. I closed the door and locked it immediately. My hands were shaking as I stood there, the basket still in my hands. What did she mean? We've been watching you. The next day I went over to the house to confront Claire. I needed answers, but when I knocked on the door there was no answer. I tried again, but the house remained silent. I peeked through the window, but the blinds were drawn. That was when I noticed something strange. The windows weren't just dark. They were empty. No furniture, no signs of life, nothing. I stepped back, confused, my pulse racing. Where had they gone? I tried to shake off the creeping dread that was crawling up my spine, but when I turned to leave, I heard it, the sound of someone whispering just behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there, only the empty house staring back at me. The next morning, I woke up to find a message on my phone. No caller ID, just a text. You're a part of the game now. Come and find us. My blood ran cold. I tried to call Sophie, but she didn't pick up. I ran outside, panicked, and looked toward the house at the end of the street. It was still empty, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, and I could feel it. They were watching me. Just then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see Sophie or a neighbor, but instead there was nothing, just the stillness of the street. Then the whisper came again, but this time it was louder, clearer. You should have never asked. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but the street was empty. The house was empty, and yet I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting, and I was part of their game now. A few months ago, I started dabbling in the dark web. Not for anything illegal, just out of curiosity. I wanted to see if the stories were true. Hackers selling government secrets, hitmen offering their services, and the unthinkable lurking just a click away. Most of what I found was scams or overpriced junk. Then I stumbled onto something that felt different. A forum called Reflections. The layout was simple, just a black screen with red text. The tagline read, "Find yourself in others." I assumed it was some philosophical nonsense or a creative writing forum, but one thread caught my attention. Doppelgangers. Post your match. Curiosity piqued, I clicked. The thread contained hundreds of pictures of people, random selfies, candid shots, even surveillance-style images, all with timestamps, and beneath each photo was another image, a match. Sometimes the resemblance was uncanny, like identical twins. Other times it was off. A person's smile might be too wide, their eyes just slightly misaligned, or their skin a shade too pale. Scrolling down, I froze. There was my face. The first photo was a candid shot of me at a coffee shop. I recognized the hoodie I wore last week and the chipped paint on the chair I was sitting on. The timestamp was from 5 days ago. Below it was another photo. My match. This version of me was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was too sharp, stretched wider than physically possible, like someone had grabbed the edges of my mouth and pulled. My eyes were slightly sunken, and my skin looked waxy. But it was me. My heart raced. I hadn't shared that photo anywhere. Someone had taken it. I clicked back to the main page, panicked, but I couldn't leave. Every time I hit the back button, I'd end up on another thread titled, Find Yourself. The screen glitched. A pop-up appeared. Do you accept your reflection? 2 buttons. Yes and no. I slammed the no button. My screen went black. For a moment I thought I'd bricked my laptop, but then my webcam light flickered on. I panicked, slamming the lid shut, but not before I caught a glimpse of the screen. It was me, but I wasn't sitting at my desk anymore. The room behind me was a basement I didn't recognize, and the expression on my face wasn't mine. It was the same too wide smile from the photo. I unplugged my laptop and shoved it under my bed. That night I barely slept. The next day I got a text from an unknown number. Why don't you smile more? Attached was a photo of me sitting in my living room. I don't go near the dark web anymore. Hell, I don't even use my computer without a piece of tape over the webcam. But it doesn't matter. Everywhere I go now, I see it. My face, reflected in windows and passing cars and shadows that move just a second too late. It's always smiling.